Talk Shoes. Recorded live.
Hello, and welcome to the Castle of Horror interview segment where we talk to writers and creators of today's genre world. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, co-creator of the steampunk graphic novel Clockworks, about a woman who leads a team of mech pilots in Victorian London out in paperback from Humanoids this September, like in a week. And in this week, in fact, from London, completely unrelated to that project, we're talking to Hadley Freeman, author of the book Life Moves Pretty Fast, The Lessons That We Learned from 80s Movies. Hadley, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited that you're here because I've been just really genuinely loving this book. Hadley Freeman is a columnist and writer for The Guardian newspaper in the UK. She was born in New York, lives in London, which is that's like the best on-paper description of a human that I've ever heard.
It's always quite weird hearing your own biography. You think, oh yeah, that is me. It's kind of hard to put the biography to the person, but yes, that is my story.
At a cocktail party, like if you were like one of those people in that scene in Annie Hall, where he was like, well, you'd have this really awesome like white superscript resume just scrolling past with while you're holding a highball.
It's funny. Last time someone introduced me at a cocktail party, though, they introduced me as Morgan Stanley because I think my name just sounds so much like an investment bank. It was a little bit confusing.
Oh yeah, no, it does. Hadley Freeman does indeed sound sort of like an investment firm. I remember actually that was one of the gags in the Ghostbusters cartoon. I know you're really into Ghostbusters, right? There was a moment in one of the cartoons where, for some reason, they crossed over into a universe where their lives were being made into a movie, and they were looking at the cast list, and it said something like, what is it, Aykroyd, Ramis, and Moranis, and they were like, that's a law firm. That doesn't sound like it. Okay. So anyway, and the new book is from Simon & Schuster, and just came out this summer. So, all right. First of all, you say towards the end of this book that every time you've been typing something, you type a title, you want to go back and watch it. Is that true? Are you still watching 80s movies even after doing this?
God, so much. I mean, even more so in a way because writing the book just renewed my appreciation in them. My boyfriend gets so bored every time we turn on Netflix in the evening and I see that a new 80s movie has come up on Netflix. I immediately want us to watch that. So it definitely, whereas studying English at college put me off reading novels, writing this book on 80s movies has only made me love 80s movies more.
I bet you go more into after a while you're getting into really deep cuts. I mean,
Yeah, that's right. And getting more into the longer and longer director's versions of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Yes and no. I mean, to be honest, I still love the films I talked about in the book, but also I feel almost guilty about the movies I had to leave out. So I sort of feel almost obligated to watch all those movies as well. So I have a huge backlog of 80s movies still to get through again.
I want to geek out with movies on movies with you, but I want to get right into some of your topics because this is really, really interesting. I mean, I really had not given this any thought, but the central thesis of your movie, of your book, is that movies made in the 1980s might have a difficult time, if not an impossible time, getting made today because of changes in how we market films and also changes what our expectations are. And you have a lot of examples of that, but the first one that I wanted to talk about was this really interesting thing about body image, about the bodies of women as presented in popular, everyone went to see the movies. You mentioned Molly Ringwald, Ali Sheedy, and Mare Winningham. Can you talk a little bit about their place in starring roles and how it might be different now?
Well, and Molly Ringwald is probably the most obvious example. She was the teen girl pinup of the 80s. She was the ultimate teen dream. And when you look at her in movies back then, obviously she was a very pretty young woman, but there is no way she'd be cast now. In fact, when I went off to Hollywood and talked to various casting directors and costume designers now working in teen movies, they were all just like, no way. She is too normal looking, to be honest. I mean, you compare Molly Ringwald to, for example, any of the girls in Easy A or even Kristen Stewart, for example, in Twilight. I mean, they look like different species. I mean, these actresses are all very good actresses. I'm not, dissing Emma Roberts or Emma Stone, but they look like models. They don't look like girls you could have gone to school with. They are very slim and very styled and very pretty with perfect makeup, whereas Molly Ringwald was a slim woman, but a normal-sized woman in a sense, and she chose her own clothes for the movies, and the makeup was very minimal. Her hair wasn't blow-dried. She looked like a normal girl. She did not look like a model, and that's a huge difference.
that she left prominent. Her freckles remain prominent.
Yep. And she, in fact, sort of exaggerated the red in her hair. She made herself look kind of more different in a way, and less like a model. She didn't dye her hair blonde. John Hughes wanted her to look like that kind of snub-nosed, red-haired teenage girl, which she was.
Yeah, that's interesting because one thing that you point out is, especially also in the way that Molly dressed, with her the vintage clothing, the floppy hat, the sort of kind of hippie flowy skirts and stuff, or just as iconoclastic, Ali Sheedy, I'm thinking about St. Elmo's Fire at this point. Ali Sheedy dresses in these absurd, like, cream silk blouses and pantsuits and stuff.
Amazing.
And yet, everybody just takes it for granted that these are literally the most desirable women on the planet in these movies. Absolutely. I mean, with Mayor Winningham's outfits in St. Elmo's Fire are obviously more hilarious, and they do become a point of humor in that Rob Lowe, discovers that she's wearing these enormous grandmother panties. But he still sleeps with her, for the record. Well, I guess he finds her Spanx or whatever the heck it is.
Yeah, exactly. But like you say, Ali Sheedy is dressed like some kind of 50-year-old Republican housewife in Georgetown in that movie. I mean, that is how she's dating Judd Nelson, who is working for a Republican senator. So that she's already dressing like what she thinks her future will be, except she's 22, and all the hottest guys want to sleep with her. And it's the same with Molly Ringwald. I mean, it's just taken as a given that she is this beautiful woman in Pretty in Pink. And Andrew McCarthy, again, who also wants to sleep with Ali Sheedy in St. Elmo's Fire. So maybe this is actually just about Andrew McCarthy. But, he can't keep his eyes off her, despite the fact that he shouldn't really date her, according to the rules of high school hierarchy. I love that. I love that these girls aren't trying to look sexy. They're not dressing for male conventional ideas of sexiness. They're dressing because that's what they want to wear. And that's a really great message to send to young women watching the movies.
You mentioned in Pretty in Pink that, at the end, that there's actually something, it's become fashionable over the past, decade or so for people to be upset that Ducky didn't get the girl.
Yeah,
and you
right.
turn it around and you say, actually, look, this is Molly Ringwald's movie.
That's right.
She can wherever the hell she wants.
And she really wanted him. And you can see that in the movie, how much she's attracted to him. And I also think what John Hughes did in that film, which he didn't even really realize, because he wanted her character, Andy, to end up with Ducky. He had to rewrite it after test audiences said they didn't like the ending. He also shows the danger of that in the character of her father, who's played by the amazing Harry Dean Stanton, in that he's left when the movie begins, his wife has already left him. And Molly Ringwald says in the movie, she never loved us. And that's an interesting parallel story of the future, of what happens if you marry someone who doesn't actually love you, which is kind of what would happen with Ducky and Andy. I mean, if she got together with him, she didn't really love him. I mean, she would have gotten together with him because he's there and he's nice. There's no suggestion throughout the film that she is the least bit attracted to him. So I feel it's totally right.
Oh, I'm sorry, Hadley. I interrupted you.
No, please, carry on.
Well, I was just thinking there's probably a super funky, interesting girl that Ducky will meet in about 3.5 years who will be perfect for him. Exactly. I mean, I was a late bloomer too, so I really relate to Ducky in this movie. To be honest, I was definitely the person who had unrequited crushes in high school and who was a bit weird and sort of tried to console myself that my weirdness was actually attractive in the way that Ducky does, or cover up my awkwardness with weirdness. So I completely get Ducky, and I also feel like he should just kind of bide his time. He'll be fine. You mentioned that you can tell how, and she has to be very attracted to Blaine because Blaine is a dumbass. I mean, honestly, his speech at the end, textually, his speech makes no sense. His whole thing where you didn't believe in me, that's bullshit. She totally gave him all kinds of chances, but whatever.
Yeah.
Let's take it for granted. It's her thing. It's her eros. She wants him. That's fine. Let's talk about that a little bit. You mentioned also that in today's films, and I hope you can help me with some examples, but you say in today's films, eroticism, real attraction, real sexuality, don't ever get treated with any kind of tenderness in a mainstream film. Yeah. And so what's up with that?
Well, I think I think a lot of it is being scared, to be honest. When I spoke to people in Hollywood and connected to some of the studios, and particularly to the rating systems, the MPAA in America, all of them were saying that parents have gotten more and more scared of depictions of eroticism and of sex, to be honest, in movies for teenagers, whereas they've gotten more and more relaxed about violence. So as a result, the big teen movies that we've seen in the past 15 years have been things like Twilight and The Hunger Games, and to a certain extent the later Harry Potters, which are more aimed more and more at older kids. And all of those movies have loads of violence in them, loads of special effects, loads of scary things, loads of kids under actual physical threat, but very, very minimal sex. And Twilight is probably the only one that you could say, well, there's an attraction between the two main characters. There is an attraction, except we're being told that the girl is risking her life by sleeping with the vampire. And then she gets pregnant by him and is literally being eaten from the inside by her vampire baby, which is a fairly evangelical Christian message to send to teenagers.
It's really strange.
It's so bonkers.
I mean,
whereas if
you can have a fetish. You can be attracted to something that's dangerous to you. And I think that there's room for that. But it's funny that's the only representation. We don't have, look at Wall Street. In Wall Street, you've got this, not hardcore, but a very typical of a popular 80s film, where all of a sudden there's this big sort of blue-lit sex scene. And that whole Adrian Lyne thing, the kind of 9.5 weeks and stuff, is real kind of sexual moments being depicted on screen, whereas that doesn't happen so much even in movies for adults anymore. I mean, obviously there are still some sex scenes in movies, but movies are now really made for the foreign markets by Hollywood, which means China and to a certain extent Russia and to a smaller extent India. And Hollywood studios are much more paranoid about censorship over there, and they also feel that violence is something that sells very easily abroad, which is why there's so many superheroes movies made now, and also because those movies don't require dialogue to be translated. So violence, they imagine, sells. That's something that's not going to put off male audiences, particularly young male audiences, whereas sex and romanticism and eroticism, that doesn't go so much anymore, and there's too much risk of being censored. Wow, unless you put it with jokes.
Exactly. Unless you do something like the Sausage Party or something, the new Seth Rogen cartoon. So unless you make it kind of like gross out comedy, kind of, there's something about Merry American Pie thing that really started to happen at the end of the 90s, kind of frat comedy, Hangover a little bit too, that sort of stuff. That's fine. But treating sex like a grown-up, romantic, serious, exciting, positive thing, that doesn't really happen anymore.
Wow. Another one that I wanted to touch on, and I apologize for going so quickly, but I want to try to hit a lot of these thoughts. Later on, I want to ask you exactly what the hell are the lessons of Sin Almost Fire, because I'm thoroughly confused. But
for sure, yeah.
This question is about class and religion. You make a comment that in major films of the 1980s, major films that everybody goes to, there's a constant conversation going on, and out loud, people are in the scenes talking out loud about class, religious differences. What part of town they're from? Well, it's class. So mostly these economic distinctions and cultural distinctions. And is that conversation?
Oh, hello? Oh, cut out. Oh, there you are. Sorry, you cut out there briefly. Sorry about that.
Oh, I apologize. So that conversation of class distinctions, race distinctions being discussed in the movies has disappeared. Why do you think that is, and can you give some examples of it?
So for me, the most interesting discussions of class are often going back to John Hughes films, because John Hughes himself was born into a lower middle class family but grew up in an upper middle class suburb. So he was always very super conscious of class distinctions and very much on the side of lower middle class kids. And you see that in Pretty in Pink and Some Kind of Wonderful mainly. And and to a certain extent also Ferris Bueller, which is kind of more of a fantasy, I think, of what John Hughes' life could have been like had he been an upper middle class kid. And there's a lot of reasons for it. And I talk to people, but also even aside from John Hughes, so many of the great films of the 80s are all about class. One of my favorites that nobody watches anymore, called The Flamingo Kid with Matt Dillon, is all about a working class kid who gets a job at a posh summer club and how this affects his relationship with his father, played by Hector Elizondo. And you just don't see discussions of class anymore because all of these movies which are depicting class are basically saying it's impossible to get out of your class. Like, America doesn't really let you do that. John Hughes does it through the microcosm of the high school. Like, the kids who are poor are the dorks, and they can't get out of that clique, and the kids who are rich are the cool ones who throw the horrible parties. And you see it also in so many of these films. And now, to say that kind of thing, to say that your life is defined by your class and that it's very, very hard to get out of it, would be seen as almost a socialist thing. It would be seen as almost an incitement to class riots. And this really changed during the 90s.
Being a downer. Like, you couldn't enjoy it. Like, somehow you couldn't enjoy it. And it would also be a bit,
you can enjoy it, and it'd be a bit suspicious. Like, what is the message of this? Why are we seeing this? And now, I think studios really believe that people want to just see rich people on screen. The teen movies, it all changed with Clueless, when there was just all these rich kids on screen. And now you go to any movie. I mean, you go to Judd Apatow's films. I mean, those people are all very rich. They live in these enormous houses. They drive these enormous cars. And in no way is it a representation of most Americans. And I'm not saying Judd Apatow has to represent most Americans, but it's amazing how absent the issue of identity politics is now in American cinema.
Wow. I mean, it's not just in these comedies. I have to mention, Amityville Horror. I don't know if you remember the movie Amityville.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Like late 1970s, I guess. Anyway, in that one, if you recall, they can barely afford that house. And
exactly.
Time is spent discussing how they can barely afford the house. And when he loses like $250 cash, it is a major nightmare. It's one of the scariest things in the film is when this dad of several kids loses a lot of cash. And it's that kind of anxiety has just completely disappeared. I mean, in the recent remake, I don't remember it coming up, in the remake of Poltergeist, the father is literally unemployed and still able, I guess through the miracle of credit, to buy a gigantic house.
That's right.
But, it's gone.
Well, I was just thinking, there's so many movies in which, the idea of losing a certain amount of money is seen as such a big thing. Like what you say about Amityville Horror. I mean, the same with something like Trading Places. When you see the butler and the prostitute, like, give over all their cash to Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, when you see Jamie Lee Curtis and Denham Elliott do that, it's a huge deal. This is like the life and death, really. And you don't get that sense anymore. You don't get that sense of people living kind of very precariously in the movies anymore. Yeah.
Boy, that's fascinating. I'm really glad that you pointed out, though, because as you go into, like, especially the chapters on Pretty in Pink, the discussion on of course Dirty Dancing. Can you talk a little bit about the class and ethnic and religious distinctions in Dirty Dancing?
Well, Dirty Dancing is such a fascinating film because it looks from the outside of just this bubble-headed, silly teen movie with hints of eroticism to turn on virginal 16-year-olds. But it's actually this really fascinating film about female sexuality. But like you say, it's so much about class and religion. And in a way, I think that it's almost impossible to pick up unless you are a member of either of those classes and religions, which I am, in fact, because it's about middle-class Jews going to the Catskills in the 60s and being waited on by working-class Catholic kids. Now, that's not an experience I ever had. I mean, that whole world kind of died out by the sort of late 70s. But my father was very much part of that world, and he grew up in Long Island. And every vacation, he and his parents and his brother would go and have this kind of experience. And he still remembers, and he still would talk about, the kind of rub between the two, the sort of the Jews, the middle-class Jews being very snobby to the working-class Catholic kids. And that is so represented perfectly in that film.
Although never mentioned. I mean,
never mentioned. It's all code. It's all code.
Yeah. There is this amazing monologue in there by the proprietor of the camp that they go to,
Mr. Kellerman.
Yeah, he gives a speech that's probably anachronistic because I don't know if this gentleman would have recognized what was happening or not. But that is a fascinating world to me, and he's mentioning that it's coming to an end. The one where middle class, not rich, but upper middle class at least, people could afford to go, and you just went to a better place or a worse place. But it was expected in America, when you're broiling hot in New York, you're going to get in a car and your whole family is going to relocate to some place by a lake for like 2 months.
I know. I mean, my dad, I say my dad was middle class. I mean, they were very lower middle class. His father worked at a gas station, and his mom didn't work. So, like, they were not on any level rich. But they still went to the Catskills every summer for 2 months. And like Mr. Kellerman says in the film when he's talking to the orchestra conductor, that world's coming to an end. And it's also so interesting that the way Eleanor Bergstein, who wrote it, really captures the prejudices between the groups. Like my grandparents were Jewish immigrants, came to America to escape the war, and they could be very snobby about working-class Catholic kids and could be very, very snobby against African Americans because they were like relaying their own prejudices they felt against other people, which is extremely painful for me as their granddaughter to see. But you also see it on the screen in Dirty Dancing, that's kind of what the Jewish guests are doing. And that's not a dynamic that you really ever hear discussed, and certainly don't see in the movies anymore, and you see it all there in Dirty Dancing.
Yeah, no, it's a conversation that's just completely not being had now, but it's fascinating there. There was a movie recently, by the way, that played with the whole Catskills thing. It was the one with Liev Schreiber. Oh God, what was that called? A Walk on the Moon.
Oh yeah, that was. I thought that was really good, that film, and it was really exciting to see that world still being played because I think people think it's like some fictional concept that Dirty Dancing came up with because it just seems so far away now.
Well, we should be angry about that, by the way. The idea that as a society we've completely hypnotized ourselves into forgetting that it was understood in the past that people who work were entitled to a certain amount
entitled
of
vacation. Absolutely.
I mean, I am not given to conspiracy theories, but it strikes me that this is a place where corporate media has definitely conspired to make people forget that some things definitely used to be better.
Yes, and a lot cheaper. And I think there's also this idea that on movies you should just see aspirational things because it makes people want things more. So you just see people living in big houses in Beverly Hills or big apartments in Manhattan. You don't see people living in these little suburban houses the way you do in Some Kind of Wonderful. It just doesn't happen.
Well, you remember, exactly, in Some Kind of Wonderful. I was thinking about Author with Al Pacino,
so
right? I think it was Al Pacino.
Yeah, I think so.
And his apartment is a nice big apartment for New York, but it's cut up into rooms and it's very difficult to light, and it's, it looks like a real place, a grungy, honest-to-God real place that somebody might live. Those have kind of been erased. Wow. Okay. I'm going to ask you this just because I am confused. All right. St. Elmo's Fire, which gets singled out. It's literally one of my favorite 80s movies. I watch it whenever
it's so great, isn't it?
It is wonderful, but I got to say, from its component parts, I have no idea what the lesson of St. Elmo's Fire is. I mean, because I guess the only lesson you can take away from it is that it's tough growing up, let go of childhood things, I suppose.
Sure.
Other than that, it's everybody's horrible.
They really are, aren't they? It's funny you mentioned it. I literally just watched it again on Saturday night because I saw it was on TV. And
oh my God, did you really? Oh, that's hilarious. All right.
I can't. If it's ever on, I will always watch it. I love St. Elmo's Fire. It's so bonkers, and obviously all of them are pretty terrible. They're all these really repugnant yuppies, and you wouldn't really want to know any of them today, except maybe Andrew McCarthy.
I like Mary Winningham. She really
she's sweet, isn't she? She's sweet, Mary Winningham. Yeah, she just wants to try. She's she's just like Andy in a sense. Like she's a smart, good girl who goes for the bad boy. But like Judd Nelson, Ali Sheedy, oh my God, you just want to kill them all. And also what's so funny in it is Andie MacDowell. I mean, Andie MacDowell, she had the best agent. I don't know who her agent was because she cannot act out of a paper bag. And she's like always popping up in all my favorite movies. And there she is again in this. I mean, the message is about growing up. I mean, for me, the main character in that movie is Billy, the guy who can't get beyond college. And all of them having to move away from the bar at the end. They decide to go to Houlihan's instead of St. Elmo's, and that's a sign that they're moving on from their time at Georgetown. But there's not really a message in it. It's such a crazy Joel Schumacher film. I mean, first of all, it's the only Joel Schumacher film I can think of that doesn't have any kind of slight hint of homoeroticism in it. I mean, it's a very different movie from
right.
Lost Boys.
You're right.
And as a result, it presents the straight world as kind of almost unbearable. You watch this film, you think, wow, people at Studio 54 were having a lot more fun than you guys at the early 80s. God.
By the way, when Anna McDowell shows up first, she is literally like encased in light. She walks through an emergency room door, and there's this brilliant halo that she walks out of. It's the strangest thing. But okay, let's see, who's the one who has the coke problem? I'm trying to remember which.
Demi Moore. So Demi Moore has the cocaine problem. Yeah.
Okay, explain. Here's the weirdest thing. There's so many characters in this, and by the way, as a writer, it's kind of fun to watch it to just understand like how to write an ensemble piece with a lot of people.
Definitely.
Demi Moore's character almost gets no scenes by herself, but everything really, really serious about her, except for I guess the end, takes place off screen. And I was watching it, and I swear to God, every time I watch it, I still think it's possible that her stepmother does not exist.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
There's a weird story that she's telling her friends because there's this whole other hospital drama going on over there off screen that she comes in occasionally, sits down at the cafeteria or wherever the hell, does some coke, and tells us about how her relationship with her stepmother. So strange.
It's so weird. My favorite thing about St. Elmo's, though, is Emilio Estevez's character. I mean, he has, to me, the greatest line when she goes, "Kirby, how are you?" And he goes, "I'm obsessed. How are you?" Which is such an amazing line. And that bit when he goes up to stalk her, I mean, he's a full-on crazy stalker. Like, tracks her down in the middle of the woods, and she's kind of fine about this. It's so weird. And she's like, "Why don't you stay the night?" Everything about it is so crazy. But it's his best role. Emilio was never better than he is in that film. He's so funny. He makes that horrible stalker who doesn't really have a personality beyond stalking incredibly appealing. And Andrew McCarthy too. I interviewed Andrew McCarthy a few years later. Many years later, a few years ago, and he was so much like Kevin, his character in that film. It was really weird. I was like, oh, so actually you're Kevin rather than Blaine, the kind of nervy, self-conscious writer, which is what he's become. He's become a writer for the New York Times.
That's so funny. No, I believe it. I mean, although the lines that Schumacher, or whoever wrote that script, I don't know.
Yeah.
The lines, all the stuff about what he is, what it is to be a writer, and what he thinks about love, you really, literally just want to punch him in the face. I mean, and it could be a function of being young. It could just be, hey, this is the kind of dumbass stuff that you believe when you get out of college.
Well, also, it's so funny because, I mean, watching it, we are both writers. I work for a newspaper. Like, the depiction 80s movies have of newspapers is so crazy. The idea that someone would let some 22-year-old write his thoughts on the meaning of life on the front page of a newspaper is hilarious. It's almost as hilarious as Crocodile Dundee. The idea that some newspaper would fly a woman out to Australia to meet some guy in the outback and then fly the guy back and put him up at the plaza is like so off the ball nuts. But I enjoy that. I like it when movies get newspapers so totally wrong. I find it really endearing.
I love the way that movies present writing because otherwise nobody would become a writer. I mean, I watched, one of the things that made me want to be a writer was Joseph Cotten in The Third Man.
Yeah, it's a good one.
He shows up and he doesn't have any money because I think a job fell through or something, and they go, "Oh, you're a writer," and he goes, "Yeah, I'm not a very well sold writer," and they're like, "That's fine. Come be a visiting lecturer at our university." And I'm like, "That's the career I want."
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody buys my books, but they still pay me to lecture. That's great.
I still want to be Kevin. I still want to be writing my thoughts on the meaning of life. I love him carrying around his notebooks everywhere as well, writing his thoughts on the meaning of life with the local DC paper. Hilarious.
It's so you're totally right, and it's because people have no idea about how the media actually works. Although I keep thinking about shit like. Meaning no disrespect. She may be a friend of yours, but I keep thinking about Prozac Nation and how those sort of memoir-y kind of things are meaning of life stories.
Yeah, that's true.
So I guess if you do it right, then
you do it right, yeah, but you're unlikely to get on the front page of a paper with your thoughts on it when you're 22 years old.
No, yeah, it's hard to envision how exactly it's news. So, okay. God, I could go on talking to you like this probably for like another hour, but I got to respect your time. Plus,
oh no, don't. I could talk about it for days, but I don't want to be filling up your podcast.
No.
I worry about your listeners' stamina.
It's delightful. Well, maybe sometime we can do this again. I really enjoy talking to you about the book.
Thank you.
The book is called Life Moves Pretty Fast, The Lessons We Learned from 80s Movies and Why We Don't Learn Them from Movies Anymore. We have just scraped like the top tip of the iceberg. There's so much in here. It's new in paperback. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.